Hello, everyone. Welcome back. This is the Reclaiming Mastery podcast. If you're new here or you're returning, thank you so much for being here and joining me in this sacred space. My intention, as always, is to provide you with practical and effective guidance to help you cut through all the noise, right? All of the information out there in the spiritual and self help and healing space to help you go directly to the experience of yourself as divine. Go bypass the rational analytical mind and go directly to that experience of yourself as divinity in form. So thanks again. On today's episode, it's funny because some of these topics that I'm inspired to share, they're hard topics to articulate, if I'm going to be totally honest, because again, especially someone like myself who's very heart based, it's actually easier for me to go into these spaces to really feel these frequencies, to really experience these things. And then when I go to articulate it, I'm like, wow, okay, this is it's a little trickier than I expect. However, I'm going to do my best. And today's topic is grace. Today's topic is the power of grace and how to experience greater levels of grace in your day to day life, how to really have that as a lived experience. So, before I totally dive in, I just want to remind you guys, right? Remind anyone listening, my passion, my purpose, and my intention is to assist you with embodying your sovereignty and your divinity. So always, I ask that you remain empowered. Never is it my intention to just give you information and you just take what I say as truth, right? There is no one way to this awakening. There's no one way to connect with spirit, connect with God, or to connect with the divine. And just receiving and regurgitating information or just believing everything that you hear really keeps you disempowered. So I invite you to, whatever you learn from any teacher, any guide, whatever you're receiving, to always filter it through your own heart, your own discernment. So it's one thing to hear spiritual information or read a book and then go and share it. It's an absolutely whole other thing to experience these things for yourself and to really embody that wisdom, right? To have that lived experience. And so my intention with anything I share or anything I put out into the world is really to hopefully ignite something in you, a spark, right? Ignite some curiosity. So when I talk about topics, right, like the divine feminine or grace, like we are today, I want you to ask yourself, what is grace to me? How do I experience grace? What does grace look like? What does grace feel like? Right? So rather than just taking me for whatever I say, I really invite you after these episodes or whenever you have time to really ponder on these topics. Really sit with them, really see what comes up for you. Okay, so now that we got that out of the way, here we go. We're diving into the topic of grace. Actually, another side note is always to drink a lot of water, because remember that this is not just information, these are energetic transmissions, right? Essentially, this space becomes this conduit, this vessel of these higher frequencies. So always drinking a lot of water and knowing that you'll only receive the frequencies that are in alignment with your own highest soul growth and evolution, always discerned by your own soul. So grace. Grace to me is this energy of unconditional divine love, nurturing, and space holding that flows throughout all things. The energy of grace, because it flows throughout all things, when allowed to do what it does, it brings nature and each of us into perfect alignment and perfect experience of our divinity and of the divinity of every being. So let's elaborate on this. When we look out into nature, for example, right, with the seasons, and we have spring, right, which brings the beautiful crops and everything's blossoming and blooming. We have the abundance of summer, and then we have this sacred time of rest and retreat that comes with winter, right? This time of inward focus. And that's really so beautiful in the way that it's balanced, the way that it happens. So, grace for us as humans, oftentimes, just an example, is oftentimes when we go through our journey, we go through our life or our awakening journey, our spiritual journey, there comes a point where you can look back throughout your life and see this beautiful, perfect divine timing and orchestration of everything that happened in your life. You're able to see how maybe losing the relationship or the job or the painful experience or what your ego would have judged as painful in that moment was actually beautifully orchestrated to help you come into greater awareness, greater embodiment of who you truly are, right? Come into greater awareness and greater embodiment of your divinity. Many people, even myself at different stages, will say, okay, cool, I get it. Grace is this perfect divine timing, this perfect guidance system, right? Right? This internal, external balancing force that runs through all things. And I hear that, but when I look out into the world, I don't see that. Where is grace for, the atrocities that are going on our planet? And so here is the thing with that. So there's a quote, right? So, not my will, but thine be done. So, thine will essentially would be grace. It would be divine will. It would be the will of spirit, the will of universe, God. Again, whatever words work for you. So, when we say, not my will, but thine be done, this is when this perfect dance, this perfect unfolding can occur. So when we see things like we're seeing in the world, essentially what's happened is that we have totally lost balance. And so many of us, so much of the world is absolutely ego driven, wounded ego, not embodied ego, but wounded ego driven. So where people are saying, not thine will, but mine be done, right? And so when we decide, when we drop out of this space of humility and reverence for the greater mind, the greater grace, the greater power that exists, and we start to say, okay, I know better, right? My mind, right? Tiviana knows better, Sally knows better, Thomas knows better, right? When we begin to think that our mind knows better, this is when we can create hardship, right? We come out of balance, we come out of embodied union, and that's when things like we're seeing going on in the world today, whether it's in the climate or in the horrible atrocities such as war that we're seeing, that's when those things begin to happen, right? It's because, again, we've lost that awareness, that another quote, right? Of myself I do nothing. Through me, God can do all things. This doesn't just mean that we're helpless, but what it means is that the greater aspect of us, our divinity, our higher self, our soul, God, universe, that part of us knows better than we do what we most need in each moment. So oftentimes, when something comes up in our life, right? Maybe we're going through an experience such as a loss of a relationship. When we're having that experience, our ego wants to jump in with judgment. This is good, this is bad, this shouldn't be happening. Why is this happening to me? We really want to get into that space of judgment. And so grace is essentially the opposite of that space of judgment, is this energy of allowance. So when people ask me, okay, so how can each of us, right? How can you have a greater lived experience of grace in your life? Well, in order to cultivate greater experience of grace in your life, we must cultivate greater allowance in our lives. Does allowance mean just passivity, just sitting there and never trying anything? No, never doing anything? Absolutely not. Does it mean only being receptive, right? Or does it mean being lazy and never, trying, never forcing? No. But allowance, which is yes, the opposite of forcing. Allowance is allowing things to be what they are in each moment, because when we're able to meet each moment with the presence, the embodied presence that comes with mastery, we're able to hear our higher self. We're able to hear spirit more clearly and know how best to act, right? So that's when, again, we're balancing that feminine and masculine, because first, we're present, we're centered, and we're able to allow and therefore receive what is ours to do. And then we're able to take grounded, empowered, embodied, sacred, inspired action. So this balancing act is much different than forcing with our ego. I have to get this done. I got to figure it all out. I have to make things happen. And so when we look at that, so on one end, there's the people that, maybe wish to actually do harm and do bad, and they'll allow their egos to drive them. That's one part of it, or do harm. I don't want to say do bad. However, on the other end, when we look at ourselves personally, so I know on my journey, we are ingrained, we've been programmed to believe that we have to figure it out. Our mind believes I have to figure it out. So for me, it'd be like on my journey, it's like Tiviana must figure it out. For so long, personally, I was totally in my head, not grounded in my body, because from whatever trauma, dysfunction, and programming that we've all experienced growing up, somewhere along the line, your mind, whether you were a child or whatever, said, I have to protect me. I have to keep me safe. How do I keep myself safe? I need to figure it out. I need to be one step ahead of the game. I need to be planning, plotting, always thinking and forcing what to be done, what needs to be done, right? We believe that by trying, trying and usually failing to control things, we would remain safe. So, with this being said, we have to extend grace to ourselves, extend grace to your mind. Like, I actually, in part of my journey, I sat with my mind and spoke with my mind as if it was its own person, right? And said, thank you. Thank you, mind, for keeping me safe. Thank you for doing what we needed to survive in those times. Thank you for keeping us alive. And now we are safe. Now we are safe to surrender to the power of our hearts, to the power and wisdom of our spirit. We no longer have to believe that we have to figure it out or do it all by ourselves. We can rest in sacred union with our divinity and trust that it will guide us safely, perfectly, and easily exactly where we need to be. Now, at first, my mind's like, no, we have to figure it out. And, this was probably years ago I said this. This is a daily occurrence, right? Because the mind is such a powerful thing. But it's really when we can begin to come into that mind-heart coherence that we can allow greater grace. So again, grace, to experience grace, we must experience and allow allowance. Allowing things to be as they are, and most importantly, becoming present. So in order to do that on a very practical level, we must work with our nervous system. If we're still in fight or flight all the time, if we're still just trying to survive, how are we going to train our nervous system that it can relax and rest in the grace that we are eternally held within? Right? Again, I don't know if I said this, but grace is not something that can be earned or can be taken away, in my experience. Grace is open to all. It is inherent to our experience. It is a part of our divinity. It's almost like this comforter that assures that no matter where we're at in the world, no matter what's going on, each of us has the opportunity to tune in to our divinity, to tune in to our grace, right? And this is what grace allows for. So by working with the nervous system, and there's many, whether this is you get a, healing sessions or you're working somatically, but by gently holding ourselves like a child, which I always talk about, I think we have to do that in order to heal, by gently holding ourselves and first extending grace to ourselves by saying it's okay. We don't have to always figure it out. We don't have to be perfect. Allowing yourself to be exactly where you are without believing you should be anywhere different, right? By doing those things, first we allow grace for ourselves. We extend grace to ourselves. And the more that we choose to extend grace to ourselves, the safer we'll feel to drop into the grace that, again, is eternally flowing within and without us at all times. So let's just reiterate that. Grace is this unconditional love, nurturing, and absolute perfect timing, divine timing that's flowing through everything at all times. And in order to have the lived experience of grace in your life, you have to cultivate the safety within yourself and your nervous system to begin resting into the present moment. And with that, you also have to decide that you are worthy of grace. We kind of, in the collective mind frame, there is this wounding of original sin where many people believe we were kicked out of the kingdom, where we're sinners. And, you may not even be religious, but this is something that's ingrained into the human psyche to believe we're not worthy of love, let alone unconditional love, let alone divine love. So we also have to do the work to let ourselves know, of course, and listen to me, of course you are worthy of this divine love. There is nothing at any time that you have or you will do where you will be unworthy of love. That's just not how it works. Each of us, by existing, are inherently worthy of love. Some of that might be a hard pill to grasp, right? Unconditional love, something we'll definitely talk about in later podcasts. So with that being said, just wrapping up the end of this podcast. And remember, this is just an entry point, right? Because we could talk about this forever, for eternity probably. But I'm just hoping to plant little seeds in the garden of your mind that in divine timing and with grace will blossom so you can step into your own experience, your lived experience of grace. But here are some practical tools. So sitting down in sacred space in meditation, and remember guys, in meditation, the intention is not simply to quiet the mind or to transcend or to astral project or do any of that. I mean, it can be, of course, that's okay. But it's really just being present with yourself and with what's arising. So the practice I want to extend to you is in sacred space, in meditation, even if just for 10 minutes, I want you to sit. I want you to slow your breath, drop in and be with yourself, with whatever arises. Maybe it's sadness, maybe it's grief, maybe it's anger, maybe it's absolute love. Whatever it is, allow it to be whatever it is for 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Even if you can't sit down for sacred space and you're doing the dishes, allow it to be as it is in that time. And in that space of allowance, see if you can tune in to the subtle reality that is grace that's flowing beneath the surface. So another practice, along with this allowing things, maybe after that 10 minutes of allowance, now you sit there and invite grace in. Invite the spirit, invite the energy, say, I call on grace. the energy of grace to join me now. I ask to experience grace in this moment and see what comes up for you. You know, what sensations in the body. Maybe your heart opens, maybe there's warmth in your heart, maybe you feel, all this beautiful energy around you, or maybe you feel absolutely nothing. And that's okay. Allow it to be what it is. But see if you can decide that you're worthy of just those 10, 15 minutes, whenever you can. I'd say a day, ideally a day. If you can begin to cultivate the energy of allowance and therefore cultivate and allow in the experience of grace in your life. Thank you guys so much for letting me share a little bit about grace today. I really hope that you water this seed and that soon enough it blossoms into this beautiful, divine forest that is grace. Because I'm telling you from lived experience, once you cultivate that experience of grace in your life, you begin to flow through life. So what happens is, rather than rowing through the ocean of life, right, and trying and efforting, you begin to sail with this divine wind and support in your sails. You begin to sail and float and glide through life much more effortlessly, with much more joy and much more love. So thank each of you so much, and I look forward to sharing with you in the future, sending you so much love, absolute blessings, and wishing you grace, sending you grace every day. Thank you.